I never thought I'd be the person standing in the middle of a crowded university courtyard, screaming at the top of my lungs while holding a handful of shredded designer clothes. But life has a funny way of pushing you to your absolute breaking point. I need to know, right now, before I even get into the details of how this started. Was I wrong for what I did? Or was this just a long overdue case of karma finally coming home to roost? I want you to imagine being told every single day that you are less than human just because of the zeros in your bank account. And then tell me if you would have stayed quiet or if you would have burned it all down like I did. My name is Maya, and for the last 3 years, I've been a scholarship student at one of the most prestigious private universities in the country. A place where the architecture looks like it belongs in a historical movie, and the students look like they just stepped off a runway. To everyone else there, I was a charity case. A ghost in the hallway who worked 3 jobs just to afford the textbooks that they used as coasters for their overpriced lattes. I spent my mornings cleaning the library, my afternoons in lectures, and my nights serving tables at a diner 3 miles off campus. My hands were always chapped from dishwater, and my eyes were always red from lack of sleep, but I had a plan. I remember the very first day I walked onto that campus. I was wearing a pair of jeans that had been washed so many times they were practically gray, and a backpack I'd used since middle school. I felt the stares immediately. It wasn't just that I was poor. It was that I was visibly poor in a sea of Prada and Tesla keys. And then there was Chloe. Chloe was the queen of the campus, the daughter of a real estate mogul who treated the world like her personal playground, and people like me like the dirt under her expensive Italian leather boots. She had this way of looking at you, not even at your face but at your shoes, and dismissing your entire existence in a single second. From day one, Chloe made it her personal mission to remind me that I didn't belong. It started with small things like accidentally spilling coffee on my only good blazer, or making loud comments about the smell of cheap laundry detergent whenever I walked by. I remember one specific Tuesday in our freshman year when I was sitting in the back of the lecture hall, trying to eat a homemade sandwich because I couldn't afford the $15 salads in the cafeteria. Chloe walked past with her entourage, stopped, and loudly asked if the smell of poverty was coming from my bag or if the school had stopped cleaning the vents. The laughter that followed felt like a physical weight on my chest. I ignored it because I had a goal. I wanted my degree, and I wanted to get my family out of the tiny 2-bedroom apartment we shared, where the heating barely worked and my mom worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep the lights on. My mom was my hero. She would come home at 4 a.m., her feet swollen and her back aching, just to put $20 on the kitchen table for my fun fund. I never spent it on fun. I put it toward my tuition balance. I couldn't afford to get distracted by a girl who had never worked a day in her life. But the bullying didn't stay small. It grew into something dark and suffocating. Chloe had a group of followers who hung on to her every word. And together they created a culture of exclusion that made my life a living hell. They would post photos of me working my shift at the local diner on the university's anonymous gossip app with captions like, "Look at the scholarship girl serving her betters," or "Hope she didn't spit in this, though she probably needs the tip." One time, Chloe even came into the diner with 6 of her friends. They sat in my section, ordered the most complicated drinks on the menu, and then complained to my manager that I was being hostile and unprofessional. I almost lost my job that night. I had to beg my manager, a kind man named Sal, to believe me. He did, but the humiliation stayed with me. They would lose my printed assignments right before they were due, or sign me up for clubs I never joined just so I'd get spam emails during exams. One night, I found my locker covered in stickers from a local thrift store with a note saying, "Go back to the bin where you came from." I took it all. I gritted my teeth, wiped the tears in the bathroom stalls, and I studied harder. I thought that if I just graduated with honors, I would win. I thought success was the best revenge. I spent my weekends in the darkest corners of the library, hidden away from the world, pouring my soul into my business ethics and logistics classes. I was the top of my class, and that only made Chloe hate me more. To her, my existence was a personal insult to her inherited status. She couldn't understand how someone who ate ramen for dinner every night could outperform someone who had private tutors since kindergarten. Then came the Winter Gala, An event I wasn't even planning to attend until I was told it was a mandatory networking event for senior projects. I spent months saving up for a dress, skipping meals and walking to campus instead of taking the bus. I eventually found a dress at a vintage shop, a deep midnight blue gown that was missing a few beads. I spent 3 weeks of late nights tailoring it by hand, sewing every bead back on until it looked like it belonged on a red carpet. When I walked into that ballroom, for the first time in my life, I felt like I actually belonged. I felt beautiful. The music was playing, the chandeliers were sparkling, and for a moment, I forgot I was the girl with the chapped hands. That lasted exactly 10 minutes. Chloe saw me, and the look of pure malice on her face told me everything I needed to know. She couldn't stand that I looked like I belonged. She didn't say anything at first. She just waited until I was standing near the buffet, talking to a potential internship coordinator, who seemed genuinely impressed with my portfolio. She walked past with a tray of red wine, tripped, and poured an entire glass down the back of my dress. As the cold liquid soaked through my hard work and stained the fabric I had spent weeks fixing, she didn't apologize. She leaned in, smelling of expensive perfume and entitlement, and whispered, "You can put a bow on a pig, Maya, but it's still going to end up in the mud. Don't ever forget your place again." The laughter from her friends was the loudest thing I'd ever heard, echoing off the high ceilings of the ballroom. I ran out of that room, tripping over my ruined hem, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I sat on the curb outside in the freezing cold, watching the luxury cars drive away. And that was the night something inside of me finally snapped. I realized that being the bigger person was just a fancy way of saying I was willing to be a doormat. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to be a doormat anymore. If Chloe wanted to play dirty, I was going to show her exactly how much mud I could throw back. I spent the next few weeks doing something Chloe never expected. I watched her. I didn't get angry, I got analytical. I realized that for all her wealth, Chloe was incredibly lazy and deeply insecure. She paid people to write her papers, she used her father's influence to get grades she didn't earn, and she spent more time on social media than in the lab. I started digging into her biggest project, the Student Entrepreneur of the Year competition. The winner got a $50,000 grant and a guaranteed position at a top firm. Chloe was the frontrunner, claiming she had developed a revolutionary new app for sustainable logistics. But I knew Chloe couldn't even code a basic Hello World program. I started spending my nights in the computer lab, looking through the public server logs. I found that the files for her project weren't created by her account. They were uploaded from a guest terminal used by a junior student named Elias. Elias was a brilliant kid from a humble background, much like me, but he was quiet and easily intimidated. I tracked him down and found him working in the basement of the engineering building. At first he was terrified. He told me Chloe had threatened to have his scholarship revoked because her father was a major donor to his department. She had essentially enslaved his intellect to build her reputation. She told him that if he ever spoke up, she'd make sure he was charged with academic dishonesty for helping her. It was a classic trap. I sat with him for hours, sharing my own stories of her cruelty, until he finally broke down and showed me the original drafts, the timestamps, and the deleted messages where Chloe literally told him, "Your brain belongs to me now." I spent weeks building a digital dossier. I recorded every interaction I could. I even managed to record a conversation at the campus cafe, where Chloe was bragging to her friends about how stupid the judges were for believing her lies, and how she was going to use the prize money for a trip to Ibiza because she already had enough clothes. I saw her laughing as she talked about how she'd probably tip the scholarship girl a nickel if she won. I had everything. I had the timestamps, the witness, and the audio. But I knew that if I just went to the administration, her father would bury the story. I needed a public stage. I needed to make sure she couldn't hide behind her family's money. I began a secret operation. I reached out to other students who had been bullied by Chloe. I found a girl named Sarah whose research had been lost by Chloe's friends, and a boy named Mark who had been forced to do Chloe's laundry for a semester just to stop her from telling the dean he was stealing from the cafeteria. We formed a silent coalition. We shared evidence, we synchronized our stories, and we waited for the perfect moment. I spent my last $100 on a high-speed external drive to store all the data. And I stayed up until 3 a.m. every night for a month, mapping out every move. I was exhausted, I was scared, and I was on the verge of a breakdown. But the thought of Chloe's face when she finally lost kept me going. I felt like a spy in my own school, navigating hallways full of enemies while carrying the detonator to Chloe's entire future. So that is the situation I was in. I had the power to ruin her entire reputation, get her expelled, and potentially trigger a massive scandal for the university. But I knew that if I failed, if her father's lawyers got to me first, she would make sure I never worked in this industry again. I would be blacklisted before I even graduated. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and I had to make a choice between safety and justice. I was thinking about my mom's tired face and my own future, and I had to decide if the risk was worth the reward. I felt like if I didn't do this, no one would. Chloe would go on to be a success, built on the broken backs of people like me, and the cycle would just continue. Before I tell you the absolute chaos that happened next, I want you to pause. Go down to the comments right now and tell me, would you have played it safe and just focused on your own graduation, letting her win to protect your own future, or would you have risked everything to take her down? I really want to see if you guys think the risk was worth it, or if I was being reckless with my own life. Is there a point where revenge becomes just as bad as the bullying? Or is this just pure justice? Let me know. The day of the awards ceremony arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The university's grand auditorium was packed with faculty, wealthy donors, and students. Chloe was sitting in the front row, looking like a literal angel in a white designer dress that probably cost more than my entire 4-year tuition. She was smug, smiling for the cameras, and already practicing her acceptance speech in her head. I was sitting in the very back, wearing my work uniform because I had a shift immediately after. No one even noticed me. When her name was called as the winner, the room erupted in applause. The dean gave her a glowing introduction, calling her the future of the industry. She walked up to the stage with this graceful, practiced walk, took the microphone, and started giving this nauseating speech about hard work, vision, and how she wanted to give back to the community. That's when I stood up. I didn't scream. I just walked toward the tech booth at the back. I had spent the last week befriending the AV tech, a guy named Leo who had also been a victim of Chloe's pranks in the past. She had once poured soda into his expensive soundboard and laughed while he tried to fix it. Leo was more than happy to help. He had rigged the system so that I could override the main feed from my own laptop. With a single nod from me, the giant projector screens behind Chloe changed. Instead of her glossy PowerPoint presentation showing her app's interface, a video started playing. It wasn't a professional video. It was a screen recording of the file directory, showing the author of every single document was Elias, not Chloe. Then, the audio I recorded started playing through the auditorium's massive speakers. Chloe's voice boomed through the hall loud and clear. Who cares if I didn't write it? Elias needs the money and I need the credit. My dad practically owns this school anyway. The room went silent. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing the air out of the room. You could literally hear a pin drop. Chloe froze, her hand still holding the trophy, her face turning a shade of white that matched her dress. She tried to keep talking, tried to laugh it off as a joke, but then the next slide came up. A series of screenshots of the threatening texts she had sent to Elias, detailing how she would destroy his life if he told the truth. I walked down the center aisle, the eyes of 1,000 people on me. I felt like I was walking on air. I walked right up to the stage, climbed the stairs, and stood in front of her. I took the microphone from her limp, trembling hand. I looked her dead in the eyes, seeing the fear and the realization that her world was ending. And I said into the mic, "You were right at the gala, Chloe. You can put a bow on a pig, but eventually, everyone sees the mud. And today, everyone is looking at you." I turned to the dean and handed him a physical folder containing all the printed evidence, including a signed affidavit from Elias and 4 other students. The fallout was instant and more explosive than I ever imagined. The dean, realizing the reputation of the university was at stake with donors watching, had to act immediately. The donors were whispering in horror, and Chloe's father, who was in the second row, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. He actually stood up and walked out before the presentation even officially ended. The investigation that followed over the next week revealed not just the theft of the project, but years of academic fraud, including 3 other papers she had bought and 2 instances where she had bullied teaching assistants into changing her grades. Chloe wasn't just disqualified. She was expelled and stripped of all her credits. She was banned from campus for life. Her father, a man who valued his public image above all else, was so humiliated by the national news coverage the scandal received that he cut her off completely. He took away her credit cards, her luxury car, and her penthouse apartment, telling her that if she was so visionary, she could figure out how to pay for her own life. A month later, I saw a photo of her on a former friend's social media. She was working at a mall kiosk, looking tired and miserable, finally experiencing the mud she loved to talk about. She was wearing a cheap uniform and her hair wasn't done. And for the first time, she looked like a regular person who had lost everything. As for me, the university offered the entrepreneurship award to the rightful student, Elias, who used the money to start his own firm and actually hired me as his lead consultant. The board of directors also offered me a full ride for my master's degree and a formal apology for the environment they had allowed to persist. They even established a new student protection fund to help students report bullying without fear of losing their scholarships. My life changed overnight. I was no longer the girl cleaning the library. I was the girl who had changed the school's culture. I remember taking my mom to a nice dinner for the first time. We didn't have to look at the prices on the menu. She just looked at me and cried, saying she always knew I was stronger than they were. Looking back, I don't regret a single second of it. I learned that silence isn't always a virtue, and sometimes you have to be the storm that clears the air. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to my bank account, but to my resilience. I finally felt free from the weight of her shadow. I realized that the mud she was so afraid of wasn't poverty. It was the filth in her own heart. And by standing up, I'd finally washed myself clean of it. This experience taught me that no matter how much money someone has, they can never buy true character or integrity. I spent so long feeling small because I let someone else define my value based on my clothes and my struggle, but in the end, it was my work and my refusal to be broken that stood the test. You should never let anyone make you feel like your background is a disadvantage. It's your fuel. It's what makes you sharper and more determined than those who have everything handed to them. If you've ever been bullied or made to feel like you don't belong because of where you come from or what you have, let this be your sign to keep your head up and fight back when the time is right. Justice doesn't always come easily, but when it does, it's worth every struggle. Never settle for being someone's doormat. Like this video if you were on my side and think Chloe got exactly what she deserved after years of cruelty. If you think I went too far or that I should have handled it privately, I want to hear that too, so share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Do you think people like Chloe ever really change? Or will she find a way to manipulate her way back to the top? Make sure to subscribe for more stories like this where the underdog finally wins, and the bullies get a taste of their own medicine. I'll see you all in the next story.